think our culture tells men that they're not allowed to rest,
Exactly.
and it's from hell. We need, in those moments, to rely more on God's strength and less on ours, right? Because if we think like, okay, well, if I just sleep 2 hours tonight instead of four, then I'll get everything that I need to get done. And
Exactly.
maybe it's more about saying, I just need to stop, and maybe God is trying to get my attention.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to check out part 2 of our interview with Samuel. If you haven't already, if you can go to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and leave us a rating and review, it really helps us grow our reach and reach more people. And that is what it's all about. Enjoy part 2.
The correlation I'm making is sympathy is of the mouth, empathy is of the heart, and compassion is of
Of the
the
Spirit.
spirit.
Yeah.
See, so I wanted to bring up like just a caveat off of that. Like, there's only certain points in the Bible where you really see Jesus really showing like emotion, where it'll say like Jesus wept,
Uh-huh.
right? And I think that weeping, like, it comes more from like that empathetical place as opposed to like that compassionate place. Because when you're just having compassion on somebody, yes, you see their struggle, and you might like, hey, you might be able to do this to be able to get out, but you're not giving them the solution, right? So just like everybody that were in the towns that were passing by, the lame individual that's been sitting on the side of this road for years, just
Hmm.
looking at him. Now Jesus comes and is like, by your faith you've been healed. Stand up, take up your mat and walk. Now this one person that was willing to go about having compassion for this individual, was able to do this for him. So, in that instance, I'm seeing like how exactly you might end up experiencing burnout from being so empathetic for individuals that you're taking on so much of what they have going on personally that you can't pour into anybody else now. So you see the examples of Jesus going and healing people, and then he withdraws, and he
Hmm.
fills back up
Hmm.
his cup with the spirit of his Father. And I think that that might be something that we all need to be able to do. But being able to recognize the signs of, okay, my cup is running extremely low. I think
Yeah.
that that's one of the like most challenging things. So can you talk about like some of the signs of, burnout that an
Great
individual
question.
might start experiencing when it comes to mental health?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great
Let,
question.
let me think about it for a second. So the signs that you'll see for burnout specifically around mental health, I think not
Spiritual.
sleeping, yeah. Not sleeping well, either sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Um, being short or short-tempered, if the person is, generally a pleasant personality, being withdrawing, pulling away. Now that doesn't mean withdrawing in the same way that Jesus did. Jesus was withdrawing to spend time with, but I'm talking about withdrawing from relationships and connections. Um, and those are things that other people are going to see. But there's some cues within us that I think we can see too. So I'm going to talk about one of my cues is negative self-talk. So if I start telling myself that I'm not good enough and like, and I know my patterns, so like if that's getting excessive or extreme and feeling that I don't want to be around or I don't want to be around others, and like those are things that I know are cues for me. So being more maybe snarky or snippy internally, again, so like I think it's helpful to learn our own cues. I think eating habits or exercising habits, like so if you're used to doing those things and you just don't want to do them anymore. So honestly, what we're talking about are the precursors to depression mostly. These are so I'm not saying just because you're burnt out, that doesn't mean you're depressed, but if you keep burning out, you could become depressed. Um, not being interested in the things that you used to be interested in, and um,
Do you have to
pulling
experience
away.
burnout? Sorry to cut you off. Do you have to
That's right.
experience burnout before you go into depression? Is that like you're gonna hit that road eventually? Is it a yeah
No,
or no?
no, you wouldn't have to, but normally you would. I mean, there would have to be like a major event. Normally it would be a progression, but wouldn't have to normally.
I remember me and Samuel talked about this because I was going through a period where I was like, I had the same question. I'm like, okay, WebMD tells me I might be depressed, but I think I might be burnt out,
Yeah.
right? And then I know we had quite a long talk about it, but yeah, usually the signs are very similar
Yeah, yeah,
between
for
like
sure.
burnout and depression. I had that lack of sleep, no motivation, didn't really want to be social.
Yeah.
I mean,
This was earlier this year.
here, I felt like, and I'm asking that selfishly for me, because this year was kind of up and down, and then the other day, when I was texting you guys in that group chat, I got my habits for, my goals for 2025 going, and I'm like, now I'm on fire. I'm like, I feel great. Okay, cool. Here we go. That's what I needed. I needed a vision. I needed goals. I needed structure. So I get back into it, and then with the excuse my French shit show that happened
Hmm.
yesterday, everything kind of just like got me going again, and I'm like, oh. Now I'm looking at my goals and my habits and I'm like, I put too much on my plate. I was so ready to take this on, and I'm like, oh man, like,
I
you
mean,
know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
there are seasons to life, and modern culture doesn't help us uh, operate from seasons. It tries to cheat seasons, right? So first of all, we have
oh,
heat, we have air conditioning, right? So we can cheat the temperatures of seasons, and then we have all kinds of lighting, so we can cheat the dark, the rhythms of light and dark. And the consequences of those things is burnout and depression, because we don't follow. So uh, getting real here for a minute. This is not where you think it's going, so don't even try to guess. But I live in a very rural area, and I'm surrounded by the Amish. Um, they don't have a choice but to live by the seasons, right? And there are significant amounts of moments in my life where is I get up early when I can, and I go out for a walk or a run, and I see their houses and they're dark, right? So if it's 6 o'clock, we have all our lights blazing in our house, and the Amish have very few, and they're going to bed. Now, they're not going to bed at 6 o'clock, but mind you, but they're going to bed early and they're getting up early. And that rhythm is good for you. And there are seasons of winter when we should be dry. And productivity and modern culture says you need to be productive all the time. And it's one of the things that God has been teaching me right now in this season with my parents, that this is a dry season. It's okay. There will be other seasons, but the focus right now is on being a son. I'm actually going up to visit them today, um, with my kids. Um, and none of that is productive. I mean, the world would say it's kind of a waste. I mean, they wouldn't say it's a waste to be with my parents, but I'm not going to be productive today. And I think it is extremely useful. And the church is horrible at this, I think. We expect our pastors to be on point 24/7, and we expect ourselves to do that too. And our church has been gracious to create. We have a three um, pastor church, and each church has its own pastor. And what they've come up with is, periodically they give each pastor a 2 month sabbatical in the summer, and the other two pastors are covering. And I think it's beautiful. Like we need respite. We need time away. And if that can only be 20 minutes today, or an hour, and that time, and I'm not good at this, right? So just so you know, but like it should be completely out of technology's um, realm, you know, to just get away. I think that increases our ability to not burn out.
See, and that was really leading into my next question of,
Uh,
like, how does the everyday individual that ends up having to make, every decision for, their family,
yeah,
for themselves and for, the people around them, a leader in an organization has to make all these decisions that go about
yeah,
impacting everybody underneath them, and sometimes that can be one of those things that's like overbearing. How
yeah.
how how should somebody go about being able to separate themselves from that and really, I guess, get back into that mental state where they can go about being themselves?
Yeah.
I don't know how to say that differently.
This this question gets me emotional. Um, Let me think how to put this, because I think our culture tells men that they're not allowed to rest,
Exactly.
and it's from hell. Um, Jesus rested, and he was God. Like, how in the world do we think we're gonna be better or stronger than him? So there's this, I call it Christian bro culture that says we just have to push and push and push, and that's what makes you a man. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm not advocating being soft, fat, and lazy. That's not what I'm advocating, but I am suggesting that if we only rely on our own strength, and the culture, and that includes Christian culture, I think honors that and puts that up on a pedestal and sees these guys that, like, man, look at all they accomplished. How did they do that? Well, they only slept 4 hours a night. Ah, that's what I need to do.
Exactly.
I just, I'm in a different phase of my life. I'm approaching 50. That that isn't healthy. Um, I was talking again, I think I was sharing this with Angelo the other day, saying that there's a very nice sentiment, and don't get me wrong, I know people mean well by it, and I'm glad that people say it. And when people are struggling, they say, God is only going to give you as much as you can handle. And it's just not true. God always gives you more than he can handle. So it's going to sound contradictory, Brian, but I'm meaning we need in those moments to rely more on God's strength and less on ours, right? Because if we think like, okay, well, if I just sleep 2 hours tonight instead of four, then I'll get everything that I need to get done. And
Exactly.
maybe it's more about saying, I just need to stop, and maybe God is trying to get my attention and saying if I would focus on him, and he is going to get me through this. God, we understand, as men, we understand that if we um, build our muscles and strengthen our resolve, we're going to get better, right? So, like, you have to tear down your muscles to build them up to get stronger. I think God wants to do things very similarly with our spiritual and emotional development. And I hear people all the time saying, like, why is God doing this to me? Because he wants you to grow, because he cares about you and he loves you. Why is God putting me in this situation where my father-in-law and my dad are sick right now? Because he wants to teach me how to handle a lot. And
Exactly.
what I've learned is I'm a strong person. A lot of people have said that you seem so strong, and I got to tell you guys, you may or may not believe this. I've always carried with me this belief the enemy attacked me with from a young age that I'm weak. I'm weak. I had a brother who was 3 years older than I was, and he was always better at everything than I was, and would beat me up, and like it wasn't like beating me to a bloody pulp, but like as brothers wrestle.
Yeah.
I believed I was weak. I was a weakling. And God is teaching me in this season, you are not weak. You are incredibly strong.
Man.
Maybe physically you aren't strong, but if we don't let God allow us to go through those experiences, right? And what I'm saying by that, you have to go through it anyways, but we can cheat it, right? Like we can hack it. And men think, including Christian men, think that that is somehow godly. And I just don't see it that way.
Exactly. So I love that illustration that you had just put out there with your brother, wrestling you and all that stuff when you guys were younger.
Yeah.
Because, if you're viewing yourself as weak, and maybe your brother saw it the same, but it was like, I got to do something to go about toughening him up. That way he can go about surviving, the same things that I went
Yeah.
through, I need for him to
Yeah.
be able to survive. And God ends up doing the same thing for us. So,
Right.
if Angelo's having a problem and then he comes and he presents it to me, and then me being empathetic, I give him the solution. This is what you need to do.
That's right.
Now I'm kind of diminishing what it is potentially that God was trying to go about teaching to Angelo, because now he's not going through every step that he was supposed to go to. And now when he encounters that same situation again, it's going to end up being, what do I do? As opposed to him already having that tool in his
Yeah.
toolbox to be able to come through and,
Yeah.
do for himself,
Yeah.
slash God doing for him, or providing. So I love that illustration. Absolutely.
So I. This is so good because it reminded me of a time where, a couple years ago, we had a common friend that ended up at the hospital, for whatever reason, right? But we had a couple people that wanted to go visit him right off the bat. My perspective is like, I think he needs to
Yeah.
stay in there by himself right now, and not be like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Not check, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's being, I don't know, compassionate. Or
think so.
I don't know, right?
I think it is.
Because I'm like, he doesn't need to be coddled right now. Like
Exactly.
he needs, and this is like what I said. I'm like, he needs to kind of sit in his own shit right now. Like
Yeah.
let him.
Yeah, don't come through and change his diaper yet.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Man.
Versus some of the other guys were like, well, we should definitely like visit him, support him right off the bat. I'm like, and for me, my perspective is like, I'm not supporting him. I just don't want to rob him of that opportunity to learn the lesson he needs to learn. These experiences that we're going through today, just like you're saying, when do you know that when's the next time you're going to have this experience to learn whatever lesson you're supposed to learn? And if you cheat it by using, someone rescues you right off the bat, if you weren't left in that hole long enough, you'll never appreciate being in the hole. In my eyes. But that's also like, the old school tough love mentality that I grew up with. Because my dad would let me, that's how I was raised. He'll let me wallow in it. And until like I'm about to drown and die, then he'll pick me up and like, okay, good job, nice
Yeah,
try.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing to that is, let's say you're having an issue like Brian said. Not only do you take him out of that situation, but then you give him the ability to think he got himself out.
Exactly.
Oh,
So then he's like, well, I have the strength to do this the next time.
Exactly.
Rather than when you're in that deep hole, you rely on God as your strength. Because then again, the glory doesn't go to God, because you never went through that. You had like a shortcut through that
Exactly.
situation.
whew,
Yeah, for sure.
damn.
Yeah.
So
I'd
it's
like
not
that-
really compassionate if you give him the answer.
I think there's two things I want to add to this. One is English loses something because we only have one word for being loving, like we just say loving. I had this conversation years ago about someone who wanted to help a family that was in need, and I said to them, and this person, as I remember at the time, was getting frustrated because the individuals were using money in ways that lower income people would use money, and
Mm-hmm.
when middle class people would use money in different ways. And
Mm-hmm.
I responded, I said, there are lots of ways to be loving. It can be loving to give them the money. It can be loving to go in and teach them how to use that money. It can be loving to let them suffer and figure out the consequences of their actions.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are loving. And I think we go back to this point of I'm going to use that story about the hospital as an example, Angelo. Maybe for some people, the loving thing would be to go in and connect with them because that's what they're hearing the Spirit
Mm-hmm.
tell them to do. And you were hearing, no, I need him to to wallow a little bit. Um, I I think we're too quick to judge other people's hearts and
Mm-hmm.
what God is, how they have been bent to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh.
and if we could pause for a second too, when someone has a need and go, God, how do you want me to meet this need? Do you want me to be empathic? Do you want me to be sympathetic? Or do you want me to be compassionate? All of them have their place. They all have their place. Um,
Wow.
this is a concept right now, and you may already know of it, but this is toxic charity. So when you take
Mm-hmm.
it at the church level, so you throw your money into the plate, and now you've been charitable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then creating food banks or clothes drives with that money, and you throw these things at people, and you're not teaching people how to eat well, you're not teaching
Mm-hmm.
people how to cook,
Mm-hmm.
but you can feel good because you gave them a turkey dinner for Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, that is a good in and of itself, and there's tons of toxic charity in the short-term mission realm, right? So most of that is really to make our hearts feel good.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I know this pushes buttons because we think like, well, wait a minute, isn't that the right and the good thing to do? Well, yeah, it is, but think of 10 or 12 steps down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm getting at. Like, compassion is really, really hard work. It is the boots on the ground
Mm-hmm.
uh, work of Jesus, and it's hard, and people don't want to do it. I have seen some of my clients for 6 or 7 years, and they push my buttons at times, some of them, not all.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had conversations with some of my clients, and some of my clients have said, why do you put up with me? Why do you keep seeing me? And I said, there's nothing that you can ever do or ever say that will make me stop caring about you. You can keep trying, but I am in this for the long haul with you. Whatever it takes, whatever it takes. It's not about a fix, it's about a relationship. And that's what I
Absolutely.
believe Jesus does for us.
Absolutely. And it passed on to the disciples. I love that adage where it talks about like when you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. But
Yeah,
when you teach a man to fish, he can eat for a lifetime.
yeah.
Yes.
You know, so the same thing would go into all the things that we're talking about. Like if you take that drug addict into your house and you say, hey, you're not allowed to leave, and you're restricting them from being able to have any kind of external communication with anybody outside the house.
I think
Yeah,
that's
they're getting
called
sober.
kidnapping.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a broad stroke for it. Yeah, yeah. But
Kidnapping, empathy,
exactly.
yeah.
Same thing. Yeah.
Just imagine Brian picking him up on the side of the road and just locking him.
Brian's got
David
him
and
a
Angelo,
headlock.
if you guys need anything, blink twice.
I love being here.
I am here on my own free will.
Yeah, but if you restrict this person from having any external communications or whatever, yeah, they're going to get sober. But
Hmm.
it's like, okay, hey, now you're sober. I'll let you right back out into the world.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
the first thing that they're going to end up doing is falling right back into that pattern that you were trying to keep
Yeah.
them away from in the very beginning. So allowing the person to actually go through those things is like, okay, maybe it's not right for me to go about associating with these kinds of people because they're dragging me into the place that I don't want to be. You know, that could potentially be the eye opener for them. Some people end up having to hit rock bottom where they almost lose their lives, you know, to say, hey, you know, this isn't right. I need to go about changing something. And, you know, I guess that is where that compassion really comes in. Like, you can be
Hmm.
very empathetic to somebody, but if you drag them through everything and then, like we've already said, you do all these things for this person, now you're going to end up feeling like some kind of way whenever they end up running back to what it was that they
Yep.
knew.
Yeah.
You know, it's
you're
like I
right.
helped
Yeah.
this person. I spent 12 months with this guy, and he went right back to the
Hmm.
same thing that he was
Yeah.
struggling with before. And now you're not potentially going to want to talk to that person. You know, it sucks.
That's
But
right.
if
So
yeah,
was it about you or about them, right? So was
exactly,
this really about you or them? Did you really want to
exactly,
help them, or did you want to feel better about helping them?
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, damn.
Samuel, I know you deal with people who have trauma,
Uh-huh.
and I'm sure you also potentially deal with people who have mental illness. What kind of I I know each patient would be unique, but what kind of methodologies or strategies do you use when working with those types of people?
People have mental health concerns?
Yeah, yeah, or
Yeah.
mental health or
Question.
anything really. Like, you know, you try to get to the root of the problem, I'm sure. But let's say they don't. So let's say I come to you and I just say, hey, I had a lot of childhood trauma, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, what would
It's
be
like,
the
okay,
structure that we typically
Okay.
go to through to do that? Like, do you employ faith-based tactics in there? Not
Yeah.
tactics, I shouldn't, but
Yeah.
like methodologies in there, or what? Like, take
So,
us through
so
your
maybe
process.
maybe yeah, maybe I'll
Not
flesh
tactics.
flesh it
Magic.
out a
What
little
magic
bit.
do you use?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll flesh this out a little. So first of all, I don't think a person who has an addiction issue, and I'm talking any form of addiction or compulsion. So chemical dependency, drinking, gambling, sex, uh, uh, food, et cetera, et cetera, um, can have one of those things unless they have trauma. There's some form of trauma because that addiction slash compulsion is managing or numbing the effects of the trauma. I also don't think anyone who has a mental health concern, rarely, there are very few instances, but rarely do they not have some corresponding trauma. So, with that being said, I find trauma under every rock because it's what I am. I am a trauma therapist. So, the first thing I'm going to ask them are, what are the traumas? Let's get a list of them so we can tactically heal from them. If you don't know where you're going, you aren't going to heal. Um, so we get a list of, well, what are the things that you experienced that were traumatizing to you? And from there, I use an approach that's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, that in and of itself is not spiritual, but anyone who holds to a faith, um, more times than not, Jesus shows up while they're healing, because Jesus is the source of healing. And what I mean by Jesus showing up, one of the ways that this process works is people remember what happened, in a safe enough way that it doesn't overwhelm them. And more times than not, Jesus ends up, or some form of spiritual component ends up showing up in that experience, in that memory. There's a very specific uh, Christian uh, spiritual healing approach that's called theophostic that invites Jesus specifically into your memories and to have him be there with you in healing.
Okay.
I also do another type of therapy that's called internal family systems that also invites the work of the Holy Spirit to do the healing. Now, if people on this podcast have heard of IFS, it isn't again specifically directed that way, but its developer, its creator called it a psychospiritual healing model. And so it is incorporated because I don't think you can heal without Jesus, without spirit. And he is going to show up because he wants, and by the way, I think I'm under attack every day because evil doesn't want people to be rescued and freed and healed. And evil is also attacking my clients constantly, keeping them from being healed because he doesn't want freedom for them.
Absolutely.
How would you handle maybe a client who is not Christian, or let's say atheist, for
Yeah.
example?
And I do have atheists and
He's
non-Christian
like, I
clients.
just don't help them. Next question. I don't accept that.
Down the road, buddy.
You see that Amish house with no lights?
You
Go
see
there.
that? You see that hole in the sidewalk?
Oh, Christian? Oh, right this way. Right this way.
So it's gonna sound like a really trite answer, but I heal them the same way. These models work for people who are spiritual or not. Now, I believe that what's happening for them is spiritual. I believe that Jesus is actually still coming to help them heal because I don't think Jesus wants anybody to be hurting and broken. My view on it is this, and it's a little bit of an interesting perspective. I tend to have that. Jesus healed a lot of people. None of them were Christians.
Oh.
Absolutely.
There weren't any Christians.
That's
Right?
a very
So
good point.
Jesus didn't care who you were. He just cared about people and he wanted them to be helped. I take the same motto. Jesus was about
Yo.
healing. He wasn't about because they didn't exist yet.
Dang it, Samuel.
Jesus going up to people, hey, you need to pray to me. They're like, what? Trust me, you'll be praying to me.
My mind's so blown. I feel like I should go jump in the hole now.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a Samuel effect. That
tell
really
you.
is. Just a couple minutes with it, and that is, I think it's one of your gifts. I don't want to go on a tangent, but I think it's something that it's been on my mind, and I want to ask this question. That's why. What's something we commonly mislabel as trauma, but it really isn't? But to us, we're like, that's trauma.
It's a good one. Or
Because I probably like, oh, okay, I'm crossing out my list. Like, not trauma, not trauma.
Mom didn't give me ice cream.
That's
Not
an
true.
interesting question, man.
Because I feel
Well-
like, because I feel like this generation, everything is
Yeah.
trauma. This generation right now, PTSD is being thrown around. I'm not saying it's not
Yeah.
a thing, because it is a thing, right?
Yeah.
Having your phone taken away is PTSD.
Right. Like
Yeah.
all these little things is
Okay.
like PTSD now or like super like, and I'm like,
Well,
Go
let
ahead,
me
go ahead.
clarify that first. So, in order to be diagnosed with PTSD, and this is sort of like my cheat code on that. In order to be diagnosed with PTSD, so you can respond to people with this. So, you're having flashbacks about that, right? You're having like nightmares. You wake up in the middle of the night and you're thinking about your mom who took your phone from you, right? So in order to be diagnosed with PTSD, you have to have flashbacks. That's sort of like the last piece. Most people aren't having flashbacks about, their parents disciplining them. Now some people are, right? Because that discipline was abusive. So I'm not denying that. But this might not go where you want it to, Angelo. But my definition of trauma in terms of what a person can be healed from. So PTSD and trauma aren't the same thing. You there's a very specific way you're going to be diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis. And I think that might be what you're getting into. Everyone is saying like, yeah, I have this problem. Well, no,
Right.
I don't think anyone lived through 2020 without experiencing some form of trauma from that. Okay. So because my definition of trauma is anything and everything that you experience that if you recall it causes you disturbance or distress. So anything that you have experienced as upsetting or distressing is something that you can be healed from. Now, there's a more important question to that. Why is it that so many things are causing disturbance or distress for people? I think that's a more important question.
Wow.
And we are not a nation right now that tolerates much of anything, and we receive beneficial cues and feedbacks when we don't tolerate things. Okay. So if we throw a hissy fit or lose it, someone is going to come to our aid, be it mom, dad, teacher, etc. So that behavior is increasingly rewarded. So more and more things become upsetting.
Mm. During COVID, did you see an uptick in clients? I don't know if you were taking on new clients or maybe some of your
Yeah,
peers saw an uptick.
I never stopped working.
Oh,
I never stopped working.
oh,
We were busier than ever, and just since I'm going to throw out there for any mental health people that might be on this call, I believe they were the unsung heroes. Um, we were working nonstop. I couldn't keep up, and I had one person say to me, so I know that this is repeatable out there in the world. One of my clients said, "Thank you for seeing me. If it wasn't for you, I probably would have killed myself because
oof.
the
Damn.
the experience, their home life was so dysfunctional, and they were stuck. They couldn't go anywhere." Um, I kept seeing
That
people in my office. I have a one in, one out, and it's really, really big. And it's also just different. Remember, like I live surrounded by the Amish. We were relatively well isolated, not because of the Amish, but because it's very rural. We were pretty isolated from COVID. This isn't Chicago. This isn't New York City. So I do understand people died from COVID massively, but we were pretty protected where I lived.
yeah, because
Because
I'm
we already self-isolate out in the country.
yeah, because I'm thinking like everyone was stuck at home. We have this culture of go, 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 go,
Yeah.
right? So when we were forced to stop,
Now you're just
And
all
yes,
we were
and there
left with
was
was
an
our
uptick.
thoughts.
yeah, yeah.
There was a
Yeah.
huge uptick. Mental health wasn't able to keep up before. They had a worse problem during
That's so
COVID,
true.
and it's increased exponentially now. It's even worse now.
That's
Right.
crazy. Yeah.
But it's interesting how you saw an uptick in trauma because I guess I don't know, would like COVID you can't really say, hey, we're going well, maybe it is traumatic to you. But I'm wondering, did people who were left alone with their thoughts realize that they had some deeply buried trauma from maybe their
Oh, for
childhood
sure.
Oh,
or
you're saying
Yeah.
like not even just COVID, but because of COVID, it exposed what was
Oh,
already
yeah, because
absolutely.
they had to slow down.
Got
So
you,
those
got you,
feelings
got you.
they've been pushing down with work and all this other things just came to the surface.
I think that goes like even back further though, because you have the veterans and whatnot from like World War I, World War II that, they weren't allowed to go about talking about the things that, they experienced when they went to wars. So now they're just dealing with it. And, as a result, they're wanting their kids to be able to express themselves in a fashion that they weren't able to.
Hmm.
So then it just continues getting passed down further and further to where now, if you're saying that we're on the extreme end, I go about expressing everything. I stubbed my toe this morning. It was the worst
Hmm.
experience ever. So we're going about being so expressive. And now, the people that were born in the generation previous to us, they're looking at us and saying, why are you guys talking about that? We never talked about that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And go back even further, people behind them are saying the same thing. So is it just going to get worse or is it going to get better? Who knows? That's tough.
I think it's great that, so I'm going to talk Gen Z. I think it's great that Gen Z and millennials think about and talk about their mental health so much. Um, but here's the rub. Here's the other side of that. Talking about it doesn't heal anything. If talking healed your disturbance, everybody would be healed. The problem is there is a lack of intimate relationship and connection, and I'm not talking sexual intimacy, but I'm talking about a lack of connection. And 100 years ago, 200 years ago, families and even extended, like you take outside of that, people were more intimately connected. Um, they related to one another, they felt each other's burdens and concerns, and I think we do less of that. There's tons of talking, right? Everybody has a podcast. No offense.
Hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
It's not like
It's
this
not,
Yeah,
one.
that's right.
it's not,
It's not as
nothing like
good as
Redwood.
this one. Yeah, this